Well, this weekend marks the 196th Manchester derby. Despite that bullish intro, it's probably the least anticipated in recent memory. Manchester City are battling for a Champions League spot, and Manchester United are battling in mid-table against no one in particular, given that they're 13th, they can't really move. Lads, what's gone wrong this season for both? And I guess what really needs to happen to make this the biggest derby again in the Premier League?
Well, Rob can speak first for United because obviously their situation is probably much worse than City's. But I guess from a City perspective, what's gone wrong at City? Well, it's kind of hard to pinpoint what the actual real problem is. There's a lot of issues, the injuries, certainly Rodri, that, Ballon d'Or winner missing virtually all the season with a cruciate ligament injury. They've had some pretty poor recruitment over the last 2 or 3 windows. They've not really pushed as hard as they should have done. Then off the pitch, there's been the uncertainty over Pep Guardiola's contract, which he resolved in November. And the big question is the 115 charges and how that will play out in the weeks and months ahead and what it'll mean for City. So all this is kind of combined together. But on the pitch, it's been down to injuries and poor recruitment and just a group of players, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne, Ilkay Gundogan, John Stones, Kyle Walker, who've just got old at the same time and are beginning to fade at the same time. So I just think City have taken their eye off the ball, and it's happened this season when other clubs have, picked it up, really. So I think from a City perspective, that's why they're in the mess they're in. And I'm going to throw to Rob in a minute, but obviously I think City's problems are quite fixable if they avoid a massive penalty with the under 15 charges. I think United's are probably more deep-seated and harder to fix.
Yeah. And you can probably, like you've just done with City there, you can probably separate United's problems into problems off the pitch and problems on the pitch. I mean, off the pitch, they're paying the price now for what has been sort of 20 years of mismanagement under the Glazer family. All those issues are kind of well documented. Everyone will know, about how United have got into this mess to the point where they're sort of struggling to meet financial fair play and profit and sustainability rules. On the pitch, it's just been traumatic, really. It goes back to the summer where Ineos kind of dithered about Erik ten Hag's future. They ended up keeping him. The season started off really slowly with more question marks around the manager. You end up sacking him in November. You bring in Ruben Amorim, who is playing an entirely different system. He comes in and the first thing he says is, there's going to be a storm coming because I'm trying to implement this new 3-4-3 system with essentially players that don't want to play it or can't play it. And he's been exactly right. And you've got a situation now where, you just said there that United are sort of 13th in the table and battling against no one in particular. And that's exactly right. And to put the Manchester derby into context, the Manchester derby really should be one of the biggest games of United's season. And it's not, because a lot of fans will be hoping to turn up to Old Trafford on Sunday to come through unscathed because they've got a much bigger game against Lyon in France on Thursday in the Europa League that is essentially going to decide the success or failure of their season. Everything now for United rides on the Europa League and whether they can win it and qualify for the Champions League. Really the result on Sunday against City is pretty insignificant, as hard as that is for me to say, because it just doesn't really matter. United fans will hope that they don't get battered, and obviously hope, just in terms of bragging rights, that they can pull a result out of somewhere. But if you would offer them the chance to beat City on Sunday or the chance to beat Lyon on Thursday, it's a no-brainer. The Lyon game is far bigger.
I mean, it's interesting watching this because from, obviously I predominantly cover the London clubs and for the last few years, although Arsenal have obviously gone close in the league, there's been this sense that actually the prizes are getting decided elsewhere, obviously Manchester City mainly. Is there sort of, I guess this is more for Oggy really, given you're sort of focusing on City, is there a bit of a frustration or a sort of a new sense perhaps that for the first time that, these trophies are being decided elsewhere now, and actually it's not, the Etihad is not the epicenter. They're not absolutely in the heart of it. Has it felt a bit different going up there because they kind of have been off the pace sort of uncharacteristically for such a while?
To be fair, I think because City have won so much in recent years, I think the fans are quite, I won't say they're accepting of not winning anything, but I think they've had such a good run that I think they're fairly realistic in the sense that you're going to have a dip at some point. It's just all come at the same time. But I don't think anyone at City actually either, fans or at the club, think this is a long-term thing. I don't think this isn't the sign of a terminal decline that's going to see City, struggling to get in the Champions League year after year. I think that, like I say, providing they don't get a massive penalty or deduction by the 1-15 charge. I think City are in a good place to bounce back. But you're right, it is weird. I mean, I've been covering Manchester derbies for over 25 years, and this is probably the most insignificant derby of that time. And it feels like Arsenal v Tottenham for a long time that, doesn't really matter in terms of deciding trophies. It's a big game on the national scale, and it'll catch a lot of eyeballs across the world. But, I can't remember the last time when both Manchester clubs had nothing to play for. Because, when City were, pre-Sheikh Mansour 2008, United were going for titles every year. So they had to win a derby when there was a derby, because obviously not every season there was a Manchester derby in the Premier League. They had to win the derby. Man City the same. But this really, as Rob said, doesn't matter. And it's a strange place to be. It really is. But in terms of the magnitude of this game, I think we have to say that United really let it down over the last 10, 15 years, because it used to be, certainly for about 5 years when Ferguson was calling the noisy neighbours and it was a real kind of aggro game, it was the biggest game in English football. It was up there with Barcelona, Real Madrid. It was massive. It decided the title most years, cup finals, etc., or certainly cup semi-finals. But United have been nowhere near for the last 10, 12 years. They've been absolutely miles off the pace, and generally in the league, City have, when they've had to win, they've won the game. United have had a few upsets, but United have never really mattered. It's basically the tables have turned in Manchester, whereby in the 90s, United would absolutely wipe the floor with City and win a title. It's gone the other way. So, yeah, this game is weird in the sense that it means pretty little.
It's funny you should say that, because the derby in April 2012, literally decided that title. United went there, lost 1-0, and ultimately, everyone knows what happens with QPR, but that day was set up by City beating United in April at the Etihad. The expectation at that time was that this was going to be a thing that happened year after year, that the derby in the second half of the season would decide the title. And Mark is exactly right, that City have kind of held up their end of that bargain and United haven't. Even in the seasons where United have finished second to City, once under Mourinho, I think, and once under Solskjaer, they were absolutely nowhere near. City were home and hosed by sort of mid-April in those seasons. It really is a sign of how far United have dropped off the face of the earth in terms of, genuine title challenges. Because this kind of, in 2012, when we were kind of setting up I was working at the Manchester Evening News at the time, and, we're, hyper-local newspaper, sort of building this up as this is going to be like Real Madrid, Barcelona. This is going to be the kind of the epicenter of football in the Premier League for years and years. And it just hasn't happened. There was that one game in 2012, and it just hasn't happened to the point we're at now, where we're sort of a week away from the derby, or the derby's on Sunday, and both sets of fans really are looking at games beyond the derby.
Yeah, I mean, back in 2012, that game, Vincent Kompany scored the headed goal, didn't he? It was, for a period of 4 or 5 years, it was the biggest club in the world, United, who probably were at the time before Real Madrid, went into kind of turbo boost, winning so many Champions Leagues. And City were the richest club in the world, the biggest and richest clubs in the world in the same city. And it's not a big city, Manchester. And it was so intense, and it was a great patch to cover, but it was crazy in the sense that, the Carlos Tevez situation, a great Man United player helped United win the Champions League, suddenly went to Man City. You had all these situations, and, City tried to sign Wayne Rooney. And they were so close to each other, but you got the sense at the time that City were pulling away. If you're in the city, you knew that City meant business. And I think for too long at United just felt, well, they might mean business, but we're Man United and we'll be all right because we're Man United. And that arrogance and that kind of misbelief, I think only now they're beginning to get over that and think that the last 10 years they've spent the time with their heads in the sand thinking that, we're Man United, we'll come back again because we're Man United. It doesn't work like that. And City, for all of the criticisms that are aimed at City, from the top down, they've got everything right in the sense that they've appointed the right people, they've invested well in the academy. Obviously there's an asterisk against City because of the question mark over the 115 charges. But when you go to City and you go to the training ground, you see the facilities, they are light years ahead of Man United. And that has happened over the last 15 years. Yes, they've had a lot of investment, but they've also made the right decisions because, as we know, United have spent a lot of money as well, and they've pretty much wasted it. City have been very strategic in what they've done. Yes, again, people question how they've done it if they've been found something wrong, but the miles and miles apart. I think United have still got a lot of catching up to do with City, whether they win on Sunday or not.
Well, just on that, Olley, let me make the counter argument for this being quite an important game, in that City are fourth on 51 points, Newcastle fifth, 50 points, game in hand, Chelsea sixth, 49, Villa seventh, 48, even Brighton eighth, 47. City do need to finish this season strongly to secure that what will probably be a top 5 good enough to get into the Champions League. From what you know, and I know we have to park the whole Premier League investigation and all of that. So if we just park that for a minute, how important is Champions League qualification to City? Because they spent a lot of money in January. You assume they're going to want to do so again. Does it feel as pivotal as it does for some other clubs that they actually do get into that top 5 and secure Champions League? Or do you think they can still rebuild and risk a season in the Europa League and continue to sort of return to the top that way?
No, I think it's massive. I think you're right. I think, being out of the Champions League, it hurts clubs more than just financially. It hurts in so many ways, in terms of the players they can attract, in terms of the prestige. And I think with City, look, again, you're right. We can't really get into the 115 charges because we don't know how it's going to end up. But let's say they do get, a deduction, and that will hit the revenue streams massively. So nowadays, with PSR rules as they are, they're much more kind of transparent. If a club is suddenly faced with £100 million, hole in their finances, it's going to hurt anybody. The one kind of flip side from City, they're very lucky this year. They got the Club World Cup, and that will probably generate between 80 and 100 million for them just by being in America for a month. So that might actually cover the gap if they miss out on the Champions League. But Pep Guardiola doesn't want to be in the Europa League. I'm pretty sure Erling Haaland doesn't want to be in the Europa League. And we don't know how many City players have got clauses in their contracts that have Champions League clauses. We don't know. But we know that certainly United, that if they're not in the Champions League, that their players and their staff take a big cut. Have City factored that in, or does City think that they're going to be in the Champions League every year? Because they've not been anywhere near to missing out in the last 10, 12 years. So yeah, it's a huge thing because it's a prestige thing being in the Champions League, as we know, and United have suffered from being out. Arsenal suffered from being out. Liverpool spent a long time out of it as well. And when you're out, it takes a long time to get back in. And when you do get back in, it's kind of hard to stay there. So City really need to be in the Champions League. So you're right, this game matters from that perspective. But I think because we're used to this game many years ago, deciding titles, it feels a bit weird that neither of them are actually going for a major trophy.
And Rob, obviously, I mean, United actually won the reverse fixture. They beat City at the Etihad in December. I know we've talked a lot about Amorim and the work that he's got to do and trying to get to the summer and all of the sort of issues. I know we've covered a lot of that before. Do you still feel he's in a place where he kind of needs a victory against City or a victory in a big game? Obviously, the fans are, this is the game they look to arguably more than any other. Do you think he needs a victory in circumstances like this to validate him, to galvanise people around him? Or do you think he's already kind of there with that? Is he still trying to win people over, I guess, is the question I'm asking. And if so, how much could this fixture change that?
I think he's certainly conscious of that, maybe more so than the fans, because, I mentioned there about the Europa League. There is no question that the Europa League campaign from here to the end of the season is far more important than what they do in the Premier League. And when this situation happened under Jose Mourinho, he was very, very quick to say, I'm just going to rest players in the Premier League. I don't care. I'm going to pick players for the Europa League and they're trying to win it. And this is what we're trying to do. Now, we've asked Amorim this a number of times, and he's said, I'm not safe enough to throw away games in the Premier League. I'm not comfortable enough in my position, not comfortable enough in terms of getting my ideas across to the squad. Also not comfortable enough in terms of, fan reaction things to be able to say, I'm just going to rest players against Man City to focus on Lyon. So he's very, very conscious that he needs to keep winning, whether it's against City, whether it's against Southampton, or whether it's against Lyon. He just doesn't feel confident enough to just sort of throw away games. Now, in terms of the actual game itself, I actually think that Man United are probably better placed to win against a team like City than they are against sort of lower Premier League teams. We've seen it a couple of times already this season against Liverpool, Arsenal, City. They're a lot happier playing in that kind of low block and try and hit teams on the break. They even did it against Ipswich a little bit when they went down to 10 men quite early. That these have been the best performances when they've sort of retreated into an organised low block and tried to hit teams on the break. Now, Amorim is really, really conscious that he can't play like that again and again and again as Man United manager. He says that a Man United manager needs to have a team that's playing on the front foot, dominating the ball, quick, fluid football, attacking football essentially. But he understands that the team is in such a difficult moment right now that kind of he has to do it. And the players he's got are far happier defending on the edge of their own 18-yard box and trying to hit teams on the break. You probably can get away with that against City on Sunday. What you can't do is get away with that against Nottingham Forest at the City ground on Tuesday, because A, it's Nottingham Forest, and B, Forest are trying to do exactly the same to you. So probably not best place to win games against Forest. But I think, maybe the fans aren't heading on to Old Trafford on Sunday with an awful lot of confidence. I think Amorim and the players probably are, because the way that they're going to set up, or the way they should set up, is probably going to suit the players he's got.
Just finally then, because it's down here as reasons for optimism. I think the producers are clutching at straws maybe with United, but it's probably an easier question for you, Olley, so I'll come to you first. What do you think is the main reason for City to feel optimistic about, the route back to the top and that they can get there sooner rather than later?
Well, primarily Pep Guardiola signed a contract until 2027. He's staying. Erling Haaland signed a 9.5-year contract, so you've got the best coach in the world and the most prolific goal scorer in the world. So that's a pretty good starting point if you're looking to bounce back. The squad, they've started to kind of regenerate. Nico Gonzalez looked a decent signing in January. Omar Mamouche. Kuzhinov looks like he's settled down a bit as well. So I think in terms of the squad that they're kind of reshaping, people like Phil Foden, I'd imagine, have a better season next year as well. I just think City got a great squad depth. Nico O'Reilly coming through the young setup. They've got young players as well. So I think if you're looking at it from that perspective on the pitch, that this looks to me like it's going to be a 1-year blip. But, and it's a big but, isn't it? We don't know what's going to happen with the charges. If Man City emerge with what they consider to be a victory and they don't get hit with a huge fine or a point sanction which knocks them out of the Champions League, then I think City will be fine next season, and they will still be the team to beat in the title race. If they lose the 115 charges and they get a big fine or a points deduction, there isn't really any room for optimism, because that could send them into a tailspin, and we don't know what the impact would be. But I think on the face of it, football reasons that they will bounce back and they will be challenging for the title much sooner than Man United.
Rob, if City got a 15-point deduction, they would be below Manchester United in the table. So aside from that possible reason for optimism, from a United point of view, can you give us one? I know it's difficult.
It is difficult because even if they start to make really good decisions consistently, which they haven't done for a long time, even if that started to happen, it's still a long road back, because you're still trying to leapfrog an awful lot of teams, catch up with Liverpool, Arsenal, City. The only thing I can say in terms of optimism is that at least there has been a change of direction. If we were sat here talking about the Glazer family going into their 20th year of ownership with no prospect of anyone kind of coming in and trying something new, and it was just more of the Glazers, more of the same old stuff that hasn't really worked, there would be an awful lot of reason for doom and gloom. Now, I know that Sir Jim Ratcliffe and Ineos and the people he's brought in haven't had a spectacular start, but at least it does feel like there is something there of a fresh start. There is, we don't know really how it's going to pan out, but there is reason for optimism, because at least they are trying something different. At least new people are coming in, fresh set of eyes with Jim Ratcliffe, Omar Barada, Jason Wilcox. The hope is that they can come in, and when it gets to the end of the season, that it'll start to make better recruitment decisions, that better players will come in for more reasonable fees, that players will come in on lower wages who are really determined to do well for Man United instead of coming to Man United for the wrong reasons. As I say, even if that starts to happen, that is just an awful long road back, because I've got such a lot of catching up to do. But at least there is reason to believe that they can start making very, very small steps forward. And then maybe in sort of 2, 3, 5 years that we are talking about the Manchester Derby being the biggest game in the Premier League and deciding titles again. I think we're a long way from that. But at least Man United are showing some kind of motivation to move in the right direction. And in terms of optimism, I know that's not a lot, but it's all I can find.
Just on that, I mean, I think Rob's right. I think we have to say that United have been going the wrong direction for a long time, and I think Ineos have basically slammed on the brakes, and it's not been easy, and it's not been popular with the fans. There's going to be protests again at the weekend. United fans are going to protest by having a sit-in at the end of the game against City, so they're unhappy about a lot of things. Ticket prices, job cuts. But I think we have seen the end of United just throwing money around wastefully on huge contracts, on transfer fees for players that are vastly inflated. I think that has been addressed. So I think they have bottomed out, but how long it will take to get back to where they want to be, that's the question, because, Man United are a big club, and, once they get some momentum, they will get back to where they want to be, but they are still in that process right now of just kind of climbing out the hole that they're in.